almost fall, basically. Summer has flown by. I can't believe that we're already this far into the year. And I fully intended to kind of take some time at the end of each month to reflect on all the books that I had read. But I didn't do that. And instead, it's the end of July. And I am just thinking about all the books I've read. I am way ahead of my reading goal for the year. And that is super exciting. It feels really good. I've read so many books. But I want to take some time just to really quickly review all of them. I have a lot of the physical copies here, but honestly, upon reflection, I did read a lot on my Kindle this year so far, which is kind of cool. But you know, I love me some physical books. So I just want to take a few moments and go over each month of this year, the books that I read. Some months are jam-packed and others not so much. So it's really interesting to kind of notice the patterns of when I'm able to read well. That might be something I also do, is look back at like last year's reading and like what months, if they're like the same, that I read a lot, or if it just is totally random depending on what's going on. This will not include January, but we will go from February till now looking at all the books I read. So thank you for joining me. So let's start off looking at my February books. I only completed 3 books this month. February is my birthday month, and it's one of my favorite months, honestly. I think it gets a lot of hate because the weather starts to get really gross. It's like the bummer part of winter for a lot of people. I had really hoped to read a lot more than I did this month, coming off of, I think I read 10 books in January because of some snow that caused some extra free time, but February was not like that at all. I was pretty busy. Like I said, I read 3 books, and one is Silly Goofy, and the other 2 were a little bit more meaty, made me think a little bit more. But first book I read was Waiting for Tom Hanks. If you watched my January video, I read a book called Better Than the Movies, which I believe I keep close by because I can't stop thinking about that book. But this book is like that same concept, but it's adults, and so very leans into romance movies and being obsessed with romantic comedies specifically. And so I really enjoyed this one. I remember thinking it was a lot like Better Than the Movies, but I still ate it right up, you know, still really put a smile on my face. So I did give this one 4 stars. This is by Kerry Winfrey. I would recommend it. I mean, it's not like groundbreaking or anything because it's very similar to other books in this genre, but I didn't hate it. So 4 stars. The next book I read is It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. The tagline of this one is Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand. I really enjoyed the way this author communicates the ideas in this book. I think it's a very human, very real way to express the feelings that can be associated with grief, and how much our culture is just bad at handling that. It was, at some points, it was like comical how bad we really are, but also really heartbreaking because so many of us are experiencing grief in different ways and we don't know how to help each other, right? And so I really appreciated this book. I did give it 5 stars. I would recommend anybody to read this book. You should read this book. I think it's really good. It definitely was hard to read at some points. It definitely didn't just sail through it. Had to like stop and kind of catch my breath a few times, but I can't recommend it enough. And then the last book I finished in February, I borrowed from a good friend. It's You Are a Theologian, and it's by Jen Wilkin and somebody else. I'm so sorry. I'll throw it up here. Jen Wilkin and some guy. And I'm sure he's very smart. But I really enjoyed this book. The whole premise is that because you can speak about the Lord, because you can study about the Lord, because you can learn about the Lord and talk about the Lord, you are a theologian. And your theology will be something. You will speak theology in some ways because you will declare some sort of belief about the Lord. And so it's important that we believe that we can be good ones and that we can communicate that well. And so I gave that book 5 stars also. It was one where I should probably reread it to kind of like reground in some of the language that they use and really take to heart a little bit more of it. But I really love that book, feeling more confident in my ability and my calling all of our callings to communicate about the Lord more. So those are the 3 books in February. Pretty good haul. Like I said, I was really sad to not get to read more, especially more fiction, because the 2 nonfiction books I read were wonderful and some of the best of the year probably, but I needed some more fun, silly, goofy. And so in the next couple months, we hope to lean a little bit more into that. Let's go into March. March and April really bleed together in my brain. I think it's because spring break is smack dab in the middle of March, and that really just disrupts the rhythm of a lot of things. I didn't go on vacation, but I did go on a mission trip during spring break this time, and so the planning for that, the recovery from that, like there was just a lot of moving parts. Those 2 months kind of blend together for me, and because April is also just, it's kind of long, but it feels like it should be something that it's not, and so it's almost, I think it's supposed to be a time where you're like really motivated to do stuff, but I just don't feel that way in April. But luckily there was still a lot of really good books that I did get to read. Most of them I started in March and finished in April, so that's another reason why I'm just throwing these all together here. The first one that I completed was Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. It's the second in the Dreamland Billionaires series. Once again, if you watched my January video, I read the first one, The Fine Print, in January. I think that's what it's called. I don't even remember. All that to say, I read these on my Kindle and I don't like them. I don't like them, and I wish I hadn't started it because I just feel like I have to read the series. Not even to like, nobody deserves it, nobody cares, but I just feel like I hate starting something and not finishing it. And so I haven't read the 3rd one yet, and so obviously it's been a couple months, but just like, I don't know, I obviously like romance books, but those just really I don't like them that much for some reason. And so Terms and Conditions, again, I read it, it's fine. I did give it 3 stars. The next book I read is also on my Kindle. Like I said, coming off of last month, there was just a lot of heavy stuff, and so I was really just looking for something fun, something silly. And so I read a book called Bound by Stardust, and that's by Angela J. Ford, I believe. This is a kind of a shorter story. It's very fantasy related. I don't know if I could tell you the plot right now, but I think the main character, she has like healing powers of sorts, and this guy who's like, I don't know, he's something. It's good. It's a good book. I just give it 4 stars. I've gotten to where I really like fantasy, and I think enjoying this book is what really pushed me to, in a couple weeks after, actually start A Court of Silver Flame. So we'll talk about that one in a second. But Bound by Stardust is really good. If you like fantasy and you're looking for just like short little stories that don't like need a lot of like world building, but you get just enough to like it, that Bound by series on the Kindle is really good. So the next book that I finished was Lead Like Jesus, Lessons from the Greatest Leadership Role Model of All Time. This was a book that at work we as a staff were reading together. We read a book every semester, and our lessons on our midweek Bible studies were about leading like Jesus, and so we read this together to kind of keep us in that mindset, and it was good. It was definitely better than I thought it was going to be. I think, books like this, any leadership book, but almost, again, not to diss the genre because I love it, but any leadership book that's like almost too grounded in like leading like Jesus, I feel like I always think is gimmicky and maybe not as sincere as I'd want it to be. I felt like this one was pretty sincere and actually had really good examples of like what it means to lead like Jesus, and I guess that's what you're looking for, right? I felt really touched by it, and I think my perspective on like my role and my role's relationship to other people with similar roles was strengthened because of this book. So I gave this one 4 stars. I cry a lot, all the time, actually, and I hate it. It's something I really dislike about myself, and I find that often if I'm being vulnerable, I will cry. And even when I am confidently being vulnerable and I want to share, I will probably cry. I don't know why. And so I frequented our local bookstore a couple times, and I kept seeing this book, Cry Baby, Why Our Tears Matter, and didn't do a ton of like research into it, but because I kept thinking about it, I bought it. And it was okay. It wasn't what I was expecting exactly. I did appreciate, I think, how important this author sees recognizing tears and what they mean culturally, and how historically there are plenty of moments where certain people groups are discredited because of their tears, or their tears themselves are discredited, or that tears are used as weapons. And I think there's a lot of validity in that. There was a lot of, I think, opinion in this book that I didn't necessarily agree with, and that's okay. I want to read books that challenge me like that. I think I was just looking for something. I don't know what I was looking for exactly. It wasn't quite this. So I did give this one 2 stars. Definitely not a you have to read this kind of book in my opinion, but I appreciated it for what it was. The next book I read was another book that I borrowed from that same friend who gave me You Are a Theologian. This one was Liturgy of the Ordinary. I really liked the structure of this book, just walking through like the ordinary parts of our lives, of our everyday, and like how they in themselves are our worship. It's easy to forget like how every part of my life points back to the Lord and is meant to reflect that, and does reflect that, and how when I'm conscious of it and present with the Spirit that's with me in those moments, I'm proclaiming something. I'm also receiving something. And the first chapter, I think, is called Making the Bed, and just talking about like those kind of tasks and like that care of things, and how there's really beauty that points to something greater in that, if we let ourselves look for it. And so I really appreciated this book. I've read it probably too fast, considering it's like slow down and see things for what they are. But it has really sat with me. I did give that one 5 stars. And last but not least, in March and April, I did read A Court of Silver Flames. Wow, this is a big old book. I was really hesitant to read it because I was kind of scared, one, to like finish the series. There's obviously at least one more book coming out, I hope more, but knowing if there wasn't any left kind of stressed me out a little bit. And I also was intimidated by the size, and I'd heard mixed things about this book because it's kind of a different track than the like original trilogy. The 2 main characters had been 2 of my favorites throughout the other trilogy, and so I thought that I would be excited for it, and I was correct. I really loved the storyline here. I loved the dynamics. It was a little too spicy, I think, for what it was. Like, you know, so many books are like that, and this series, it can be like that. This one is probably the biggest culprit. That aside, I really enjoyed the dynamic of it. The struggle at some points was aggravating, but also seemed more human, I think, than maybe some of the other ones have. And so I enjoyed this a lot. A Court of Silver Flames, I did give this one 5 stars. Woo! I give out 5 stars probably too easily, but especially after some of the books that were more disappointing in this like 2-month span. I think when a book like had me captivated, I was like, you got me, 5 stars. So that's March and April, and so it's time to start moving into the more summery months. So May was a really big month. I think it must have been on the back half if I had to look back at the dates when I read these, because the beginning of May is crazy, but I think as soon as the school year ended, I hit the books, truly. And so I read a ton this month. So let's start with the Ali Hazelwood books. I think I read both of those first. We had The Love Hypothesis, which I believe was her first one, and then Love Theoretically. Couldn't tell you what order that came in. If you don't know Ali Hazelwood, she writes a lot of like women in STEM romance books, and so they're interesting. In January, I read Check and Mate, which was really good, but, well, actually, I don't know if I like these better. Don't ask. These books were both really good. I think if I had to pick between these 2, I might pick The Love Hypothesis. I don't know. But they're both really good. I feel like they both had decent twists. I think if I had been looking for it, I would have seen it faster, but both of them had really satisfying, like, oh, this was actually going on, or oh, this person wasn't quite who we thought. So I gave both of these 4 stars. The next book I read was Transforming Friendship by John Wyatt, and this is kind of a reflection on John Stott and some of his, like, memorable moments, testimonies from people who are close or friends with him. And so I've been thinking about, and I think I might make a video about this, just like friendship, and especially like covenant friendships, biblical friendships, and what it actually looks like to be a friend to each other, and a friend of Jesus. And so back in May, I was beginning to think about that, and so I picked up this book It was pretty good. It wasn't, again, I keep kind of picking up books thinking they're going to be something that they're not, but this also was really interesting thinking about culturally. Like, at the beginning, he kind of set the stage of like how culture has made friendship difficult, and not necessarily in like the we're so busy kind of way, even though that's part of it, but more in like the dynamics between people. Like, there's this weirdness to be close for some reason and to be known, and so he kind of talked to that a little bit and what that looks like. I also gave this book 4 stars. Getting a 4-star for me is pretty easy, and honestly so was a 5-star, but this month, as you'll see, it's mostly 4-star reads, which all were good, but I didn't find any like really lingering with me as much as maybe I hoped. Next, my husband gifted me this book, The Fury. I don't know how to say this author's last name, but he also wrote The Silent Patient, which I read not too long ago. The Silent Patient is like pretty popular, I think. It had a really good twist, I thought. Again, I feel like some people are like so predictable, and I just like don't pay attention enough, I think, to catch twists. I'm not dumb. like okay, all that to say, he writes books that are a little suspenseful, a little thriller. This one was, it reminded me of other things. Like, I kept picturing the second Knives Out movie, Glass Onion. I kept picturing like that scene. I don't think that's really what we were going for, but that's where my mind kept going. And there's way more backstory to it than a movie like that. Like, it has way more depth than that. I think. I don't know. Who am I? I think like it wasn't as like shock factor as maybe I wanted. There was a few times where I was like, whoa, but it never was like, whoa. Does that make sense? Are you tracking with me? I gave it 4 stars. I feel bad that my husband bought a hardback copy of this book. It didn't resonate with me as much as I wanted it to, but I have been able to let people borrow it, and so I guess it's not all bad. Okay, the next book I read was Funny Story by Emily Henry. I don't have it, but I wiped out these other 2 just to have something to hold. I loved Funny Story. That was my 5-star read. I have given every Emily Henry book 5 stars. I just love her writing. I feel like Emily Henry does a pretty good job of showing like friendship in her books, like in addition to the romance of it all. She is just such a captivating writer. I like the characters that she makes. Even the ones that aren't the most in-depth, I find interesting, and I want to hear them speak, and I want to see them interact. And almost always breaks my heart to a degree, and I think Funny Story was no different. It really had in my heart the whole time. But I also pulled these out because I've really been thinking about reading these 2 specifically. Beach Read was the first Emily Henry book I read, and I think it's still my favorite. And so, but Book Lovers I feel like is probably fan favorite, and it is really good. It's probably top 2 or 3 for me still. But I don't know, so I think I might reread them now that I've read all of her books and see if I still think that. But stay tuned for that adventure. The last book I read was on my nifty little Kindle, and it was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. So that's actually the second in a trilogy of standalone romances. I read it because it was free on Kindle Unlimited. So I still haven't read the first one. I'm currently reading the third just for the summer. But Yours Truly was okay. I think sometimes it just felt not real. I think of course it did feel. I think something with Abby Jimenez writing that I've noticed, especially after starting just for the summer, is that the dialogue she writes doesn't do it for me. I'm like, if someone said that to me, I would be rolling my eyes, walking away, because that doesn't make sense. Why would you say that like that? And I don't know, maybe that's me being too judgmental of the genre, because what do I expect? But I felt that way, and just for the summer a little bit, like kind of cringe at just like how people are speaking to each other. I did like the conflict. I liked the storyline. Sometimes I just had to like not worry about the specifics of what they were saying. So I did give that 3 stars. I haven't read Part of Your World yet. I don't know if I will, but I wanted to read this one. I hope I like it better than Yours Truly. Yours Truly wasn't bad. I'm honestly kind of surprised I rated it 3 stars, but looking back, I wonder if I should have given it 4, but probably not. I'm gonna go with my gut and say that Yours Truly got 3 stars, and I hope just for the summer it really blows it out of the water. So that, friends, is up to May. And so now, let's chat June and July. This summer has been really good, and I hope that as we continue into my favorite season soon, that I keep reading a lot. Reading in the summer is nice. Like, I feel like that's pretty, like, the classic to like read by the beach or by the pool, and I love that. But man, I love reading when it's cold out and I've got a warm drink and I'm reading something either like a cozy mystery or even something a little more like keeping me on edge. Like I really enjoy that. But I did try to lean into the summer and read some fun, silly romances. And so I didn't read them all in order, but this summer I did read the Chestnut Spring series on my Kindle. And so these are like, well, I call them cowboy books. The first one is a cowboy, kind of. He's like a bull rider. So it's small town romance, I guess is what I should say. They're not all cowboys. That's a different genre. but he's kind of a cowboy. Anyway, so they are flawless, heartless, powerless, reckless, and hopeless. Did I get that right? I did. I gave the middle three 4 stars, and then I gave flawless and hopeless 3 stars. I don't know how to explain because they're very cheesy. They're longer than they need to be. Like, it is not top tier literature by any means, but I just found it really endearing. I think a small town setting is what I really like. I think I just like picturing. This sounds so silly. I like picturing community like that. Cute. And so I think reading books or like the romances set there, I just find those really cozy. I read those all over the place. Some on vacation, some when we were traveling, some here. That was like a running theme probably for the month of June, which I really enjoyed. I do recommend that series way more than I recommend the Dreamland Billionaires trilogy. I would suggest that you read these 5 books instead. Amongst all of that, I read this book, Asking Better Questions of the Bible by Marty Solomon. This book is one that my husband has recommended to me for a while, and a couple students have read it as well and really like it, and my husband listens to this guy's podcast, and so I've been meaning to read this for a while and finally got to it. He does a really good job of challenging us to ask the right questions when we go to the Word, like really care about what kind of book it is and the context of it, and not in a overly intellectual way, but in a way that matters and shows that we appreciate the text for what it is. And so I appreciated he kind of split it up based on like section of the Bible, looking at like wisdom literature versus like history and all that good stuff. The letters, Revelation, like he really separated it in a cool way. Yeah, I found this really easy to read too, like sort of like You Are a Theologian. I read it probably too fast because I was like just kind of flying through it. It was really captivating, but I bet there's a lot in here that like if we sit with it and really let it affect our Bible reading, it could have a really cool impact. And so I definitely recommend this. I gave it 5 stars. Next, you don't need to hear me say much about this one because I love this book. This was me rereading Romancing Mr. Bridgerton before part 2 of the most recent season of Bridgerton came out. I love these books. I love this era. I love the show. I just think it's so great. I gave it 5 stars. It's a sweet little friends to lovers, and I just think these books are really good. I have only read the first 4. I hope to read the next 4 probably soon. Maybe next spring. I don't know if I'll read them this year, just because they're kind of springy books. I mean, that's what the show is, kind of springy, except for the newest season I think is going to be not so springy, which tracks. Anyway, I love this book. 5 stars. If you're interested at all in this series, I say go for it. Carly Fortune has become one of my favorite authors, I think. Her book Every Summer After was really popular not that long ago, and I read that and ate it up. I really enjoyed it, and I anxiously awaited the next release, which was Meet Me at the Lake, and that one was a little bit of a disappointment, and I think generally that's what people agree with, is that it wasn't her best. I remember not like loving some of the choices that the main characters make, truly in both of those books, but I think Every Summer After had other things going for it that Meet Me at the Lake did not. And so this summer will be different. I was really interested in reading this one because I just wondered what the angle would be. Like, would she improve? Would she lean more into the vibe of Meet Me at the Lake? And then would I not like it as much? And I was so pleased with this book. There was still a point where you're like shaking your head at the main character, like, why would you do that? Like, kind of selfish or kind of stupid. But I love this plot. I loved the conflict. I thought it was not like, oh, it's so realistic, because at the end of the day, it's probably not. But I found the dynamic between the main character and her best friend and the family and all this stuff really neat. And it also, again, was a really good picture, I think, of friendship. I think that's what really gets me in romance books, is when the main character has like good friends, and that like is important to the story. And so that's what I loved about this book, I think. I recommend all her books, really. The second one is objectively not as good. This one, I think, I don't know, Every Summer After is still probably my favorite. I don't know, I just look back on the first books I've read. I said this about Emily Henry, like the first books I read of these authors just become my favorite and I can't let them go. And so that might be the case here, but this book was awesome. I also gave this book 5 stars. That might have been too nice, but I just loved it so much. I was really invested, so I think it earned it. The most recent book that I finished was Counterfeit Gods by Timothy Keller. I read that because our young adult class at church was doing a class series based on that book, and so wanted to get the source material. And I really liked that book as well. I think it was really challenging for me, specifically thinking about like success and money, and how not even like big, I want to climb this corporate ladder or whatever, like that's not really my MO, but I think just how I measure my life is so based on how I think other people think of it, and if it's as successful or looks as successful as it should, quote unquote. And I don't know, I just appreciated time to like think about that, and some of his biblical examples of why those are false gods that will never satisfy, and how often I let those false gods dictate my day and how I feel about myself. And so that was really challenging, and I'm excited to kind of start another busy season, another busy school year with that on the front of my brain, because I think I need that. I gave Counterfeit Gods 5 stars. Well, you are all caught up on the books that I've read so far in 2024. If there are any books that I should go ahead and get on my list for the fall season, please recommend them for me. I would very much be interested. I did buy an Agatha Christie book recently because I heard that Netflix is adapting it into a series, and it's gonna have one of the actors who is in the show My Lady Jane that I did just watch, and I also plan to purchase that book. And so those 2 are on my radar, but if there's any others that you would recommend, please do. If you have questions about these books that I read, I would love to chat them. I love to talk about books. I love to read books with people, and I just think it's really cool what we can dream about and what we can imagine and what we can learn when we just let ourselves sit and read. So I think I'm gonna do that now. Thanks for watching. You should go read a book too. How about that? Bye.